He swore his heart would never feel a thing again. But seeing her step out of the shower, everything inside him collapsed. She was young, pure, and there by chance. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, and you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. The March rain fell heavy over the Cotswold Hills, as if the sky wanted to wash away all the secrets the town kept between its stone houses and its abandoned gardens. High on the ridge, Vance Manor rose imposingly against the dark clouds, its closed windows reflecting only the grey emptiness of the slowly dying afternoon. Arthur Vance watched the storm from inside his study, his firm hands holding a glass of whiskey as his eyes scanned the gardens that had once been his wife's pride. At 59, he still maintained the erect posture that had made him one of the most respected businessmen in the country. But there was something different in his gaze, a shadow that hadn't existed 5 years ago, before Marianne disappeared. The empire he had built over 3 decades continued to thrive. His construction companies dominated the market in southern England, his government contracts were in the billions, and his name was still whispered with reverence in the halls of London high society. But all that glory felt like it was made of paper when he returned home each night to find only the echo of his own footsteps in the empty corridors. Marianne had vanished on a winter's night, leaving only a short note and a wedding ring on her dressing table. The police concluded it was a suicide after her clothes were found on the edge of a cliff, but her body never appeared. Arthur cried in public during the symbolic funeral, received condolences from hundreds of people, and then locked the pain in his chest like one buries the dead. Since then, the manor seemed to have stopped in time. The 42 rooms were cleaned religiously by the housekeeper, Mrs. Amelia, but no one truly inhabited them. Arthur slept in his suite, worked in his study, and avoided any place that held memories of Marianne. Her bedroom remained locked, untouched, like a sanctuary he had neither the courage to profane nor to forget. The social life that had once animated those walls had died along with his wife. Arthur declined invitations, received no visitors, and maintained only professional relationships with the few who still dared to approach. The women of society, some widows, others divorced, had tried to capture his attention in the early years, but he repelled them with a coldness that soon became legendary. It was said that Arthur Vance had buried his heart along with his wife. Mrs. Amelia, who had worked for the family for over 20 years, was one of the few people who could still draw more than monosyllables from her employer. She had known Marianne since the wedding, had witnessed the happy years, and had also seen the first cracks in the relationship. She knew things she preferred to keep to herself, but sometimes on long, silent nights, she wondered if she should have spoken up before it was too late. It was she who brought Claire to the house. The young woman appeared one April morning, when the rain had given way and the sun was trying to break through the heavy clouds. Mrs. Amelia found her waiting at the gate, a small suitcase at her feet, and a letter of recommendation in her hands. Claire Miles was 23 years old and had the saddest eyes the housekeeper had ever seen in someone so young. She came from the countryside, from a small town where everyone knew each other, and where the mistakes of the past followed people like eternal shadows. She had spent the last 4 years living between convents and charity homes, working in exchange for food and shelter, always on the move, as if fleeing from something she couldn't even name. Sister Teresa, from St. Vincent's Home, had written the letter of recommendation with motherly affection. Claire was trustworthy, discreet, hard-working, and needed an opportunity to start over, far from the past that haunted her. Mrs. Amelia read the letter twice, observed the young woman standing outside the gate, and felt something stir in her chest. Perhaps it was compassion. Perhaps it was just the desperate need for another living presence in that house that felt more like a mausoleum. When she took Claire to see the manor, the young woman showed no astonishment at the grandeur of the rooms, nor curiosity about the ostentatious wealth that overflowed from every piece of furniture and work of art. Her eyes scanned the spaces with the discretion of someone who had learned not to desire what was beyond her reach. She asked only one question: "How many people live here?" "Just Mr. Vance," replied Mrs. Amelia, "and now you, if you accept the position." Claire accepted. Not because the offer was irresistible, but because she had learned that a fresh start was a luxury she couldn't afford to turn down. The room she was given was on the third floor, small and simple compared to the rest of the house, but with a window that looked out over the gardens and the hills in the distance. It was the first space she could call her own after years of living in borrowed rooms. Arthur learned of the new employee's arrival through a note Mrs. Amelia left on his desk. He didn't bother with it. In recent years, a few people had passed through the house without him paying much attention. Maids who couldn't adapt to the silence, gardeners who preferred less melancholic jobs, cooks who saw no point in preparing meals for just one person. They all ended up leaving after a few weeks. Their first meeting happened by chance, one morning when Arthur came down for breakfast earlier than usual. Claire was arranging the flowers Mrs. Amelia had picked from the garden, replacing the withered ones with fresh daisies. She was startled when she saw him appear at the entrance to the dining room, dropping one of the flowers on the floor. "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured, quickly bending down to pick it up. Arthur paused for a moment, observing the young woman. Claire was thin, almost fragile, with brown hair tied in a simple bun and clothes that seemed chosen more for practicality than for beauty. But there was something in her gestures that caught his attention, an almost liturgical delicacy in the way she handled the flowers, as if each movement were a small prayer. "You're the new maid," he said, more as a statement than a question. "Yes, sir. Claire Miles." She straightened up, keeping her eyes lowered. "I hope I'm not in the way." "You're not." Arthur walked to the table and sat at the head, as he had every morning for the past 5 years. "Continue with your work." Claire finished arranging the flowers in silence, aware of his gaze on her movements. When she was done, she gave a small nod and left the room, leaving behind only the gentle scent of daisies and a strange feeling in Arthur's chest, as if something that had been dormant had stirred slightly. In the following weeks, they developed a silent routine of coexistence. Claire would wake before dawn to prepare the house for the day, always careful not to make unnecessary noise. Arthur followed his rigid work schedule, leaving shortly after breakfast and returning only in the late afternoon. Sometimes they would cross paths in the corridors or the kitchen, exchanging polite greetings before each went their own way. Mrs. Amelia watched this cautious dance with growing interest. Claire was different from the other maids who had passed through the house. She didn't ask questions about the family's past, showed no curiosity about the locked rooms, and treated every object in the house with a care that bordered on veneration. It was as if she knew instinctively that she was treading on sacred ground. More importantly, Arthur seemed less tense with her presence. Mrs. Amelia, who knew his every expression and mood, noticed small changes that might have gone unnoticed by others. He lingered longer at breakfast, sometimes making comments about the weather or the flowers Claire arranged daily. Once she caught him watching the young woman through the study window as she hung laundry on the line out back. Claire, for her part, was beginning to feel at home for the first time in years. The routine of the manor gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since she was a teenager. Tending to that immense space was almost like caring for a cathedral. It required reverence, dedication, and a silent understanding that every corner held important stories. She knew the house hid tragedies. She didn't need anyone to tell her the story of Marianne Vance to notice the signs. The locked room on the second floor, which Mrs. Amelia cleaned alone every week. The portraits of a beautiful woman that had been gradually removed from the main rooms, but could still be seen in less visited quarters. The way Arthur avoided certain corridors, as if carrying ghosts was too heavy a burden to bear. One May night, when the temperature dropped and the wind from the hills made all the windows in the house rattle, Claire couldn't sleep. She went down to the kitchen to make some tea and found Arthur sitting at the table, still dressed in his work suit, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know you were here." She made a move to turn back, but he stopped her with a gesture. "You don't have to leave. The house is too big for us to hide from each other." His voice was slightly hoarse, either from the alcohol or from exhaustion. "What are you doing up at this hour?" "I couldn't sleep. The wind—" Claire hesitated, unsure if she should continue. "I was going to make some tea. Would you like me to make some for you as well?" Arthur watched her for a moment as if seeing her for the first time. Claire was wearing a simple robe over her nightgown, her hair loose and falling over her shoulders, and there was a vulnerability in her posture that contrasted with the composure she maintained during the day. "Why not?" He pushed the bottle aside. "It's been a long time since I've had tea." Claire moved about the kitchen with familiarity, heating the water, choosing the herbs, preparing 2 cups with the same careful movements she applied to all her tasks. Arthur watched her in silence, noticing for the first time how beautiful she was in a quiet, almost hidden way. She didn't have the dramatic beauty of Marianne, who could stop entire conversations when she entered a room. Claire's beauty was more subtle. It needed to be discovered slowly. "Where are you from?" The question slipped out before he could think better of it. Claire paused for an instant before answering. "From the countryside, a small town near Gloucester. Family. I don't have any." The answer was quick, definitive. Claire placed the cup of tea in front of him and sat on the other side of the table, maintaining a respectful distance. "And you, sir? Do you have family in the Cotswolds?" It was an innocent question, but Arthur felt a familiar pang in his chest. "I did," he said simply. They drank their tea in silence, listening to the wind shake the trees. In the garden, there was something strangely intimate about that moment. 2 strangers sharing the early hours, the loneliness and the warmth of a hot drink in a house too cold for one person alone. "Thank you for the tea," Arthur said when he finished. "It was good." "Any time you'd like," Claire replied. "Good night, sir." She went up to her room, leaving him alone with the 2 empty cups and a strange feeling that something had shifted between them. Arthur stayed there for another hour, watching the steam rise from his cup while thinking of brown eyes and delicate hands, preparing tea in a silent kitchen. That night, for the first time in 5 years, he dreamed of something other than Marianne. The days began to pass with a different lightness. Arthur found himself looking for Claire around the house, making up excuses to pass by the kitchen or the gardens where she worked. Claire, in turn, began to pay more attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way he folded the newspaper when he finished reading, the way he had of smoothing his hair when he was concentrating, the half-smile that sometimes appeared when she arranged fresh flowers on the breakfast table. Mrs. Amelia watched this subtle change with a mixture of hope and concern. She knew Arthur too well not to realize that he was rediscovering something he had buried along with Marianne. But she also knew the ghosts that still inhabited that house, and she knew that some secrets were too big to be ignored forever. The first long conversation between them happened on a Saturday afternoon when Arthur returned from a meeting in Manchester and found Claire reading in the conservatory. It was an old book, its pages yellowed, and she was so engrossed that she didn't hear him approach. "What are you reading?" Arthur came closer slowly, not wanting to startle her. Claire looked up, slightly flushed at being caught reading during work hours. "I'm sorry, It was just a short break." "No need to apologize. What's the book?" "Othello. I found it in the second-floor library." Claire closed the book, marking the page with her finger. "I hope you don't mind. Mrs. Amelia said I could use the library." "Of course you can." Arthur sat in the armchair next to hers, a piece of furniture he hadn't used in years. "What do you think of it?" "It's intense." Claire hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Sad, too. Othello is so lost in his own obsession that he can't see what's right in front of him." "And do you believe his version? That Desdemona betrayed him?" Claire thought for a moment before answering. "I think some people get so trapped in the past that they create truths that don't exist. It's easier to blame others than to accept that maybe we destroyed what we loved most ourselves." The answer took Arthur by surprise. There was a depth to it he hadn't expected to find. "You speak like someone who's been through that." "Everyone has in some way," Claire said, opening the book again. "The difference is that some learn to move on." They talked for over an hour about books, about stories, about the way people dealt with loss and new beginnings. Arthur discovered that Claire had a natural intelligence that compensated for her limited formal education and a way of seeing the world that was both pragmatic and poetic. Claire, in turn, saw beyond the cold facade Arthur maintained, sensing a man who was genuinely interested in what she had to say. When the conversation finally ended and Claire returned to her work, Arthur remained in the conservatory for a while longer, looking at the armchair where she had been sitting and feeling that something inside him had awakened after a long sleep. That night, during the solitary dinner he had taken every night for 5 years, he wondered what it would be like to have company at the table. Not just any company, but someone with whom he could talk about books and life, someone who could make him laugh and who would truly listen when he spoke. It was a dangerous thought, and he knew it. But for the first time since Marianne had disappeared, Arthur Vance was considering the possibility that it might be possible to truly live again. June brought the chill of the hills with more intensity than usual. The mornings dawned shrouded in thick fog, and the afternoons called for lit fireplaces and hot teas. For Claire, who had always been sensitive to the cold, the change of season meant a greater proximity to the indoor spaces of the manor, especially those where Arthur spent most of his time. It was during one of these chilly afternoons that she discovered the piano in the main drawing room. The instrument was covered by a heavy cloth, as if someone had tried to hide its existence. Claire removed the cover carefully, revealing a Steinway grand piano that must have cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. The keys were dusty, but the instrument seemed well maintained. She couldn't resist the temptation to play a few notes. The sounds echoed through the empty room, creating a melancholic melody that seemed to perfectly match the atmosphere of the house. Claire had learned to play the piano in her childhood, before life took her down different paths, and her hands still remembered the basic lessons. "I didn't know you played." Arthur's voice made her stop immediately, her hands freezing on the keys. He was standing at the entrance to the room, watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." Claire stood up quickly, starting to replace the cover on the piano. "Don't stop." Arthur entered the room, approaching slowly. "It's been years since anyone played that piano." "Was it your wife's?" The question slipped out before Claire could think better of it. The moment the words left her mouth, she realized she had crossed an invisible line. Arthur paused for an instant, and Claire saw something move across his face. Pain, perhaps, or just the surprise of hearing someone mention Marianne so directly. "It was," he said finally. "She played very well. Studied at the conservatory when she was young." Claire felt the weight of the moment, the importance of what had been shared. "I'm sorry for touching it. I didn't know it was so personal." "Don't apologize." Arthur came closer, standing beside the piano. "Actually, it's good to know it still works. Keep playing if you like. I enjoyed hearing music in this room again." Claire hesitated for a moment before sitting down again. She began to play a simple melody, something she remembered from her childhood. Arthur closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. It wasn't the complex and technically perfect music that Marianne used to play, but there was something in the simplicity of Claire's performance that touched a different part of his soul. When she finished, they sat in silence for a few minutes, absorbing the music that still echoed mentally through the room. "Where did you learn to play?" Arthur asked. "My mother taught me the basics when I was a child. She worked as a teacher in a small school and sometimes gave music lessons too." Claire kept her eyes on the keys as she spoke. "After she died, I never played much again. We didn't have a piano at home." "How old were you when she died?" 15. The answer was soft, but Arthur could hear the weight of the years of absence in it. "And that's when everything changed." Arthur wanted to ask more, wanted to understand what changes had led a young woman to live between convents and charity homes, but something in Claire's posture told him that there were territories not yet open for exploration. "You can play whenever you like," he said. "The house needs music." That conversation marked a subtle shift in the dynamic between them. Claire began to play the piano in her free afternoons, and Arthur, who used to work late in his study, started to end his workday earlier to listen to the melodies coming from the drawing room. He never entered the room while she played, but he would position himself in the hallway where he could listen without interrupting. Mrs. Amelia observed these changes with a mixture of joy and concern. She knew the details of Arthur's life better than anyone, and she knew there were things about Marianne's disappearance that he had never told anyone. She saw how he looked at Claire during meals, the way his posture relaxed when she was nearby, and she feared that history was repeating itself in a way that could be devastating for everyone involved. One morning, as Claire was arranging flowers in the dining room, Mrs. Amelia approached her with a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. "May I ask you a question, dear?" The housekeeper's voice had a motherly tone that always disarmed Claire. "Of course, Mrs. Amelia." "What do you know about the history of this house, about what happened here?" Claire stopped arranging the flowers, sensing there was something important in the question. "I know that Mr. Vance's wife died a few years ago, and that it was very difficult for him." "She didn't die, Claire. She disappeared." Mrs. Amelia sat in one of the dining chairs, gesturing for Claire to do the same. "And there are things about that disappearance that, well, that are complicated." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Amelia hesitated, as if torn between loyalty to her employer and an urgent need to protect Claire from something she couldn't name. Marianne was an intense woman. Everything about her was dramatic, exaggerated. When she was happy, she lit up the whole house. When she was sad, it felt like the world was going to end. The housekeeper fiddled nervously with her coffee cup. In the last few months before she disappeared, she was very strange. Paranoid, suspicious, sometimes she would talk to herself. Did Mr. Vance know about this? Arthur tried to help, but Marianne pushed everyone away towards the end. She accused him of terrible things, said he was trying to drive her mad. Mrs. Amelia lowered her voice. In the end, no one knew what was true and what was her imagination. Claire felt a coldness growing in her stomach. And what does this have to do with me? Arthur hasn't allowed himself to get close to anyone since Marianne disappeared. Until you arrived. Mrs. Amelia reached for Claire's hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm just telling you to be careful, dear. I don't want you to get hurt." The conversation stayed with Claire for the rest of the day. She tried to work as normal, but she found herself watching Arthur with different eyes when he came home that afternoon. Was there really something sinister about him that she hadn't noticed? Or was Mrs. Amelia just protecting her from unnecessary pain? That night after dinner, Claire was organizing the library when she heard footsteps in the hall. Arthur appeared at the door, looking more tired than usual. "Working late?" he asked. "Just organizing some books." Claire kept her eyes on the volumes she was arranging. "How was your day?" "Long. Many meetings, many decisions." Arthur entered the library, observing her work. "You seem strange today. Did something happen?" His perception surprised her. Claire didn't think her worries were so obvious. "No, everything's fine." "Claire?" Arthur came closer, and she finally raised her eyes to meet his. "If something is bothering you, you can talk to me." There was a sincerity in his voice that made Claire's heart race. In that moment, looking into his eyes, it was hard to believe there could be any malice hidden there. But Mrs. Amelia's words echoed in her mind. "Mrs. Amelia told me about your wife, about what she was like in the final months before what happened." Arthur stiffened. "What did she say exactly?" "That Marianne was going through emotional difficulties, that she was paranoid, suspicious." Claire took a deep breath. "And that she accused you of things." The silence that followed was tense and heavy. Arthur took a few steps back, creating distance between them. "Marianne was ill," he said finally, his voice controlled but harsh. "She began to have episodes of paranoia, delusions. I tried to get help for her, but she refused treatment. She said I was trying to have her committed to get her money." "And you weren't?" The question came out more directly than Claire intended. Arthur stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something break in his gaze. "If you have to ask that, then perhaps Mrs. Amelia is right to be concerned." His voice was cold now, distant. "Perhaps it's best we maintain a strictly professional relationship, Miss Miles." He left the library, leaving Claire alone with the books and a weight in her chest she couldn't explain. She had ruined everything with a stupid question, motivated more by fear than by reason. But at the same time, she couldn't completely ignore the doubts Mrs. Amelia had planted. In the days that followed, Arthur returned to the cold formality of their early days. He greeted her politely when they met, but there were no more long conversations, no more moments of closeness. Claire felt the loss like a physical ache, an absence that hurt more than it should. It was on a night of heavy rain that everything changed again. Claire was in her room, trying to read to forget the melancholy that had settled into her routine, when she heard noises from downstairs. They weren't the normal creaks of the house. They sounded more like something falling or being dragged. She went downstairs cautiously, following the sound to Arthur's study. The door was ajar, and through the crack she could see Arthur slumped in his armchair, an overturned whiskey bottle on the floor beside him. For a moment, Claire thought he had passed out, but then she realized he was crying. These were not discreet tears of controlled sadness. Arthur was sobbing like a man who had held in his pain for too long and could no longer contain it. It was a devastating sight, that powerful, controlled man completely shattered by grief. Claire hesitated for a moment before entering the study. Arthur didn't hear her approach, too lost in his own anguish. She knelt beside the armchair, lightly touching his arm. Arthur. He looked up, and Claire saw a vulnerability there she had never imagined possible. Without thinking, she held his face between her hands, wiping away the tears with her thumbs. "Forgive me," he whispered. "I didn't want you to see me like this. You don't need to apologize." Claire sat on the arm of the chair, keeping one hand on his face. "Everyone has the right to cry." "I loved her so much," Arthur said, his voice broken, "and in the end, she was so afraid of me that she preferred to die rather than continue living with me. You don't know if she's dead." "I know." Arthur closed his eyes, leaning into Claire's touch. "I know Marianne better than anyone. She was dramatic, but she wasn't a coward. If she were alive, she would have come back to get her revenge on me, to prove she was right. The silence can only mean one thing." Claire felt her, heart breaking for him. All the suspicions Mrs. Amelia had planted seemed absurd in the face of this man, wrecked by loss and guilt. "You're not to blame for her illness," she said softly. "I'm to blame for not knowing how to help her, for letting my pride and my stubbornness stop me from doing what was right." Arthur opened his eyes, fixing them on hers. "And now I'm afraid I'm about to make the same mistake again." "What mistake?" "Falling in love with someone who deserves so much more than a man haunted by ghosts." The confession hung in the air between them. Claire could feel her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Arthur was looking at her as if memorizing every detail of her face, as if he knew this moment was too precious and fragile to last. "What if that person didn't care about the ghosts?" Claire whispered. "She should care for her own safety. And what if she was strong enough to face anything?" Arthur raised his hand, touching her face in the same way she had touched his. "Then I'd say she's braver than I deserve." The kiss happened slowly, as if they both knew that once they crossed that line, there would be no going back. It was gentle and desperate at the same time, laden with all the tension and desire that had been building between them for weeks. When they parted, Claire rested her forehead against his, both of them breathing raggedly. "This is madness," said Arthur. "Perhaps," Claire agreed, "but I don't care." That night, they stayed together in the study until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, trying to map the dangerous territories they had decided to explore together. Claire told him about her lost childhood, about the difficult years that led her to the convents. Arthur spoke of his fears, of the responsibility of carrying an empire, and a guilt that seemed to have no end. When the sun finally rose, they knew they had changed something fundamental between them. There was no going back to the safety of professional distance. Now they were two people who had chosen to risk love again, even knowing the price might be too high to pay. But neither of them knew yet that the ghosts of the past were about to become far more real than they imagined. The days that followed that night in the study passed like a careful dance between two people learning new choreography. Claire and Arthur kept up appearances during the day, fulfilling their roles as employer and employee in front of Mrs. Amelia and the few suppliers who visited the house. But when they were alone, the formality dissolved like sugar in the rain. Arthur began to come home from work earlier. inventing excuses to skip meetings he once considered essential. Claire found herself paying more attention to her own appearance, choosing dresses that enhanced her discreet figure and leaving her hair down more often. They would talk for hours in the library, share intimate meals in the conservatory, and sometimes Arthur would accompany her on walks through the estate's extensive gardens. It was during one of these walks, on a July afternoon when the sun was trying to pierce the region's typical mist, that Claire noticed something strange in Arthur's behavior. They were looking at the gardens that had once been Marianne's pride, now somewhat neglected, but still beautiful in their wild melancholy, when she noticed that his hands were trembling slightly. "Are you all right?" she asked, gently touching his arm. Arthur quickly shoved his hands into his pockets, trying to hide it. "Just the cold. It always affects me more than it should." Claire wasn't convinced, but she didn't press the issue. She had learned that Arthur had his own timing for revealing the things that troubled him. But from that day on, she began to pay more attention to small details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way he sometimes dropped objects for no apparent reason, how he took longer to button his shirt in the morning, how his elegant handwriting had developed small irregularities. Meanwhile, Claire began to explore more areas of the manor, not out of invasive curiosity, but because her job required her to know every corner of the immense house. That's how she discovered the attic, accessible by a narrow staircase hidden behind a door that looked like a simple utility closet. The attic was filled with carefully organized and labeled boxes. There were furniture covered in sheets, wrapped paintings, and old trunks that seemed to hold decades of the Vance family's history. Claire had no intention of touching anything, but one particular box caught her eye. It was open, as if someone had been there recently, and it contained loose photos of Marianne. These weren't the formal photos that still decorated some rooms of the house. These were more intimate, spontaneous. Marianne laughing in the garden, Marianne playing the piano, Marianne embracing Arthur on a trip that seemed to have been happy. But there was something in her expressions that bothered Claire. Even in the seemingly joyous moments, Marianne's eyes seemed to carry a deep sadness, as if she were always a little lost in her own thoughts. At the bottom of the box, Claire found a small old tape recorder and a collection of cassette tapes. Each tape had a date written by hand, covering the last 6 months before Marianne's disappearance. Claire knew she shouldn't listen to those recordings, but something stronger than curiosity made her pick up one of the more recent tapes and put it in the recorder. Marianne's voice emerged from the small speakers, clear and melodious, but laden with an anguish that made Claire shiver. September 15th. Arthur came home late again today. Said he was in a meeting, but I know he watches me. Sometimes I wake up at night and feel someone in the room even when he's sleeping beside me. Mrs. Amelia is different too. Yesterday I caught her going through my things. She said she was cleaning, but I know they're looking for something. Claire paused the recording, her heart pounding. This was not the voice of someone in control of her faculties. There was real paranoia there, a fear that transcended reason. But still, she felt compelled to keep listening. September 22nd. I found pills in my food, small white traces in my breakfast coffee. I confronted Arthur, but he denied it, said I'm imagining things, that I need help. But I'm not crazy. I know what I see. The recordings continued, each more disturbing than the last. Marianne spoke of feeling like she was being watched, of finding her belongings out of place, of conversations she was sure she had heard, but that no one else remembered. By the end, her voice was almost unrecognizable, trembling and desperate. The last recording was dated 3 days before her disappearance. I can't trust anyone anymore. Not Mrs. Amelia, who raised me. Not Arthur, who swore to love me forever. They think I don't know what they're planning, but I've found out everything. The documents are hidden in the safe in his study. If something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth. Claire turned off the recorder, her hands shaking. Marianne's words echoed in her mind, creating doubts she had managed to push away in recent days. Could there be some truth to the missing wife's accusations? Or were these recordings just the product of a sick mind, paranoid beyond reason? She put everything back in the box exactly as she had found it and came down from the attic disturbed. She couldn't stop thinking about Marianne's last words about documents, hidden in the study safe. What documents could they be? And why did Marianne think they were important enough to mention in a recording she clearly intended to leave as evidence? That night at dinner, Claire watched Arthur with different eyes. She tried to reconcile the passionate, vulnerable man she had come to know with Marianne's desperate accusations. He noticed her distant behavior. "You're very quiet today," he said, putting down his fork. "Did something happen?" Claire hesitated. Part of her wanted to tell him about the recordings, to share the weight of that discovery. But another part feared that, by doing so, she would be destroying something precious that had begun to blossom between them. "I'm just tired," she lied. "It was a long day." Arthur studied her for a moment, and Claire had the uneasy feeling that he could see right through her lie. But he didn't press, just nodded and went back to eating in silence. After dinner, they sat in the library as they had every night for the past week. Arthur chose a book of poetry to read aloud, a tradition they had developed. His voice was deep and melodious, and Claire closed her eyes to let herself be carried away by the words. It was then that she noticed the tremor in his hands again. This time it was more pronounced, affecting the way he held the book. Arthur paused in his reading, aware that she had noticed. "Arthur," she said softly, "we need to talk about what's happening to you." He closed the book slowly, placing it on the side table. For a long moment he was silent, as if deciding whether he trusted her enough to share another secret. "I went to the doctor last week," he finally said, "for some tests I'd been putting off for months." Claire felt a cold knot in her stomach. "And? Early onset Parkinson's. The symptoms are still mild, but they will progress." His voice was controlled, but Claire could feel the fear behind the apparent calm. "The doctor said I have maybe 10 years before the condition becomes truly debilitating." 10 years is a long time," Claire said, trying to sound optimistic. "And medicine is always advancing. There might be new treatments." "There might," Arthur agreed. "But you need to understand what this means. I've always controlled everything in my life. Every decision, every move, every outcome. The idea of gradually losing that control is—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It's terrifying." Claire got up from her armchair and went to sit on the arm of his, running a hand through his graying hair with tenderness. "You don't have to face this alone," she said. "Claire, you barely know me. You can't commit your future to a man who—" "Who what? Who is human? Who gets sick like anyone else?" Claire held his face, forcing him to look her in the eyes. "Do you think I fell in love with you because I thought you were perfect?" "You fell in love with me." The question caught her off guard. They had danced around that feeling for days, but neither had been brave enough to name it. "Yes," she said simply, "I fell in love." "Even knowing all this? My past, my problems, and now my illness? Especially because of all of it." Claire kissed his forehead gently. "I don't want a perfect man, Arthur. I want a real man. And you are the most real man I've ever known." They kissed then, a different kiss from the previous ones. There was an urgency. To it, a need to connect that went beyond physical desire. It was as if they both instinctively knew that time was a luxury they couldn't take for granted. When they parted, Arthur rested his forehead against hers. "I fell in love with you too," he whispered. "For the first time in 5 years, I woke up this morning wanting to live the day." "Then let's live it," Claire said. "One day at a time, facing whatever comes together." That night, when Claire finally went up to her room, she carried with her more than just their mutual confession of love. She also carried the doubts planted by Marianne's recordings and the new reality of Arthur's illness. It was as if she were balancing two different versions of the truth, unsure which one to believe. She lay in bed, looking out the window at the moonlit gardens, thinking of Marianne wandering those same corridors years ago, recording her desperate suspicions on a cassette tape. Could it be that a paranoid sick woman was right about some of her accusations? Or was Claire allowing the ghosts of the past to contaminate something pure she was trying to build? Outside, the wind swayed the old trees on the property, creating shadows that danced on her bedroom walls. For a moment, Claire had the strange sensation that she wasn't alone, as if someone were watching her from the darkness. But when she turned on the light and looked around, She found only her own reflection in the window, frightened eyes staring back. She turned off the light again and pulled the covers up to her chin, trying to push away the disturbing thoughts. But as she tried to sleep, she couldn't stop thinking about Marianne's last recording and the mention of documents hidden in Arthur's safe. What secrets were kept in that safe? And did Claire really want to find out, knowing that the truth could destroy the only happiness she had found in years? In the darkness of the room, the questions echoed without an answer, while downstairs in the silent house, the ghosts of the past seemed to whisper promises of revelations no one was prepared to face. The discovery happened by chance, as the most devastating revelations often do. Claire was organizing the papers Arthur had left scattered on his desk when a letter fell out from inside one of the financial reports. The envelope wasn't sealed, and as she went to put it back, her gaze was caught by the name written in the recipient field, Marianne Vance. Claire's heart stopped for an instant. The letter was dated just 3 weeks ago. With trembling hands, she pulled the paper from the envelope and began to read. It was a formal letter from a bank in Lisbon confirming the monthly transfer that had been made regularly to Mrs. Vance's account for the past 5 years. The amount was substantial, enough to maintain a comfortable life anywhere in the world. Claire read the letter 3 times before the words truly registered in her mind. Marianne was alive, not just alive, but being financially supported by Arthur for all these years. Everything he had told her about the guilt, about the suicide, about not knowing if she was dead or alive, it was all a lie. She sat down heavily in the chair, trying to process the magnitude of the discovery. Why would Arthur lie about something so fundamental? And if Marianne was alive and he knew it, what other secrets was he hiding? Marianne's recordings came back to her with renewed force. Perhaps the woman hadn't been so paranoid after all. Perhaps her suspicions of conspiracy and betrayal had a real basis. Claire put the letter back in the envelope and placed it among the papers, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She needed to know more. She needed to understand what had really happened 5 years ago and why Arthur had constructed such an elaborate lie. That afternoon, taking advantage of the fact that Arthur was out for a meeting and Mrs. Amelia was shopping in town, Claire decided to investigate his study more thoroughly. If Marianne had mentioned documents hidden in the safe, perhaps there was other evidence of what had really happened. The safe was hidden behind a seascape painting, not exactly the most creative hiding place, but effective. Claire didn't know the combination, but she remembered seeing Arthur open it once, and had noticed he used a sequence of numbers that seemed familiar. She tried Marianne's date of birth first, then their wedding date. On the 3rd try, using Marianne's date of birth in reverse, the safe opened with a soft click. Inside were financial documents, some jewelry, and a thick folder labeled simply M. Claire carefully removed the folder and opened it on the desk. The first document was a detailed medical report on Marianne's mental state, dated 6 months before her disappearance. The diagnosis was clear: bipolar disorder with psychotic episodes aggravated by substance use. The doctor recommended involuntary commitment if the patient continued to refuse treatment. Next was a series of emails exchanged between Arthur and a lawyer specializing in international law. They discussed the legal implications of a voluntary disappearance and how to protect the family's assets if the situation became untenable. But it was the last document that truly shook Claire. It was a handwritten letter from Marianne to Arthur, apparently written shortly before she disappeared. Arthur, I know you think I'm mad, and perhaps I am, but I would rather go mad far away from you than be cured by your methods. I'm leaving because I still have enough lucidity to understand that our life together has become a prison for us both. Don't look for me. Don't try to bring me back. Let the world think I'm dead, if that makes things easier for you. But know that I chose to live far from here because it was the only way to survive. Perhaps one day you'll understand that sometimes loving someone means letting them go. M. Claire closed the folder, feeling nauseous. The truth was more complex than she had imagined. Marianne had chosen to disappear, but Arthur knew where she was and was supporting her financially. Why hadn't he told her? Why had he let everyone think she was dead? And more importantly, What did this mean for what was growing between them? When Arthur came home that night, Claire was waiting for him in the library with the folder open on the table. She saw him stop at the door. When he noticed the exposed documents, the color draining from his face. "Claire," he began, but she cut him off. "5 years," she said, her voice surprisingly calm considering the storm she felt inside. "For 5 years, you let me believe your wife was dead." Arthur entered the library slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal that might attack at any moment. "It's not what you're thinking," he said. "And what am I thinking, Arthur? Because I honestly don't know what to think anymore about anything you've told me. Marianne is alive, yes, she chose to disappear, and I let it happen because it's what she wanted." Arthur sat in the armchair opposite her, keeping his distance. "But she's sick, Claire, very sick. The doctor said she needed constant care. Then why isn't she in a hospital? Why is she living alone in Portugal? Because she threatened to kill herself if I tried to have her committed against her will. And because—" Arthur paused, running his hands through his hair. "Because I was tired of trying to save her from herself." The confession hung in the air between them. Claire could see the genuine pain in his eyes, but she also felt anger rising in her chest. "So you sent her away and pretended she was dead, so you wouldn't have to deal with the problem. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? Then explain to me how it was." Claire stood up, walking to the window. "Explain to me how a man who says he loves me could lie about something so fundamental. I lied because I was afraid you would leave if you knew the truth." Arthur also stood, approaching her. "Marianne is alive, but she's not really my wife anymore. She chose to leave me. She chose to abandon our life together. But you're still legally married. On paper, yes, but she signed a power of attorney giving me control over our assets. She wants nothing more to do with me besides the money I send every month." Claire turned to face him, trying to read the truth in his eyes. "And you? Do you still love her?" The question caught Arthur off guard. He hesitated for a moment that felt like an eternity. "I love the memory of what she was before she got sick," he said finally. "But the woman in Portugal is no longer the Marianne I knew. The illness transformed her into someone even she doesn't recognize." "That doesn't answer my question." Arthur came closer, holding Claire's face between his hands. "I love you, Claire. You who are here, now, real and present. Marianne is the past. You are my present, and if you'll let me, my future." Claire wanted to believe him. She wanted to be swept away by his words and his sincere eyes, but the discovery had shaken something fundamental in her trust. "How can I be sure I'm not just replacing a woman you can't have?" "Because you're completely different from her. Because with you I discovered it's possible to love without drama, without constant pain, without fear of what will happen each day." Arthur kissed her forehead gently. Marianne was fire, beautiful, intense, but she burned everything around her. You are like sunlight, you warm without destroying. The analogy was beautiful, but Claire still felt lost. "I need time to process all this," she said. "How much time?" "I don't know. I just know that now everything feels different, as if I've been living in the shadow of a ghost who is neither a ghost nor in the past." Arthur nodded, though he clearly didn't like the answer. "I'll give you all the time you need, but Claire," and he took her hand, "don't let the mistakes of my past destroy what we have. Please." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to reorganize everything she knew about Arthur and the situation she had gotten herself into. Every moment they had shared now seemed tainted by the underlying lie about Marianne. Around 3 in the morning, she heard footsteps in the hall. They weren't Arthur's heavy steps, but something lighter, almost furtive. Claire got up, silently, and went to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. The footsteps stopped outside her room. Claire waited, her heart pounding, but the steps resumed, moving away toward the end of the hall. Curious and still too agitated to sleep, she carefully opened the door and peeked out. Mrs. Amelia was standing before the door to Marianne's room, a key in her hand. Claire watched in silence as the housekeeper unlocked the door and entered the room that had remained locked for 5 years. A faint light came on inside, and Claire could hear low murmurs as if Mrs. Amelia were talking to someone, After a few minutes, the housekeeper came out of the room, locked the door again, and walked back toward the stairs that led to her quarters on the first floor. Claire returned to bed with even more questions than before. Why did Mrs. Amelia visit Marianne's room in the middle of the night, and who was she talking to in there? When she finally managed to fall asleep, it was nearly dawn. Her dreams were populated by ghostly women walking through dark corridors, whispering secrets she couldn't understand. At breakfast, Arthur looked as tired as she did. They greeted each other politely, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Mrs. Amelia served the coffee as usual, but Claire noticed the housekeeper was watching her more closely than normal. "Did you sleep well, dear?" Mrs. Amelia asked. "More or less," Claire replied. "I heard some noises during the night, someone walking in the corridors." The housekeeper and Arthur exchanged a quick glance, so quick that Claire almost missed it. But there was something there, a silent communication that made her feel even more isolated. "Sometimes the house makes strange noises," Arthur said. "Old wood, the wind, you'll get used to it." Claire nodded, but she knew what she had heard wasn't the house settling. It was human footsteps, purposeful and furtive. As she drank her coffee, she wondered how many other secrets were still hidden within the walls of that manor, and if she would ever manage to uncover them all without losing her sanity in the process. What she didn't know was that some secrets have a life of their own, and once disturbed, refuse to return to the shadows where they have always lived. The days following the discovery about Marianne were marked by a silent tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the manor. Claire continued to perform her duties, but there was a new distance in her movements, as if she were observing everything from the outside, trying to decipher the truth behind the appearances. Arthur, for his part, seemed to be walking on eggshells. He tried to act normally, but Claire could feel the weight of his anxiety whenever they were in the same room. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression of near desperation, as if he were seeing something. Pressure slipped through his fingers. It was Mrs. Amelia who finally broke the forced silence. Claire was hanging laundry on the line out back when the housekeeper approached, carrying a tray with tea and homemade biscuits. It was an August afternoon, with the weak sun trying to warm the thin air of the hills. "We need to talk, dear," said Mrs. Amelia, placing the tray on a small iron table that Marianne had installed years ago. Claire hung the last piece of clothing and turned to face the woman who had become almost a mother to her in recent weeks. There was something different in Mrs. Amelia's posture, a determination Claire hadn't seen before. "About what?" Claire asked, though she already suspected the answer. "About the things you've discovered. About Marianne. And about what you saw the other night." Claire felt a cold knot in her stomach. "What I saw?" "You saw me going into her room, didn't you?" Mrs. Amelia poured the tea with precise movements, as if buying time. "There's no use denying it. This house may be large, but it's not quiet enough to hide all its secrets." Claire sat in the opposite chair, accepting the cup of tea the housekeeper offered her. "Why do you do it? Why do you visit her room in the middle of the night?" Mrs. Amelia sighed deeply, as if she had been carrying a weight for a long time. "Because I promised her I would look after her things until she came back." "Came back? But you knew she was alive?" "I always knew." The confession came out low, almost a whisper. "I was the one who helped her disappear." Claire almost dropped her cup. "What?" "Marianne came to me 3 days before she vanished. She was desperate, afraid, but also more lucid than she had been in months. She knew Arthur was considering having her committed against her will, and was terrified of spending the rest of her life locked in a psychiatric clinic." Mrs. Amelia paused to take a sip of tea, her hands trembling slightly. "She asked me for help to run away, said she'd rather die free than live as a prisoner. I tried to talk her out of it, but—" The housekeeper shook her head. "I've known Marianne since she was a little girl. I knew when she had made a final decision. And you helped her. I arranged for false documents through a contact I had from when I was younger. I gave her enough money to start a new life, and I promised I would keep her room untouched until she felt safe enough to return or to collect her personal belongings." Claire tried to process the information. "Did Arthur know you had helped her?" "He found out a few months later. He was furious at first, but then he understood that I had done what I thought was best for her." Mrs. Amelia looked directly into Claire's eyes. "Arthur is not the villain of this story, dear. He is just a man who loved a sick woman and didn't know how to save her. But he lied to me about all of it. He lied because he was afraid. Afraid you would judge him. Afraid you would leave. Afraid of being alone again." The housekeeper leaned forward, taking Claire's hand. "You need to understand something. Arthur hasn't lived these last 5 years. He has merely survived. Until you arrived." Claire felt tears burning her eyes. "How can I know if what he feels for me is real or if I'm just a convenient substitute? Because I've known this man for 20 years, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Marianne in the happy times." Mrs. Amelia squeezed her hand. "Marianne was passion, intense, consuming, destructive. You are love, calm, healing, constructive." That night, Claire went up to her room with her head buzzing with thoughts. Mrs. Amelia's revelations had changed her perspective on many things, but there were still unanswered questions that troubled her deeply. Around 2 in the morning, she heard the footsteps in the hall again. This time, she decided to investigate personally. Claire left her room silently and followed the sounds to the 2nd floor. To her surprise, it wasn't Mrs. Amelia she found, but Arthur himself, standing before the door to Marianne's room with a key in his hand. He was dressed only in a t-shirt and pajama bottoms, his hair disheveled as if he had woken up abruptly. There was something in his posture that made Claire remain hidden in the shadows, watching. Arthur unlocked the door to the room and went inside. Claire waited a few minutes before cautiously approaching. Through the crack in the door, she could see Arthur sitting on the edge of the bed that had belonged to his wife, holding a photograph in his hands. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could see his lips moving, as if he were having a conversation with the image in the photograph. Every now and then he would shake his head or gesture slightly, as if responding to something only he could hear. Claire backed away silently, feeling like an intruder on an intimacy that didn't belong to her. But the scene she had witnessed disturbed her deeply. Was Arthur still talking to Marianne? Did he still maintain an emotional connection with his missing wife? Back in her room, she sat on the bed, trying to make sense of what she had seen. Could it be that, despite all his declarations about moving on, Arthur was still emotionally tied to Marianne? The next morning at breakfast, Claire watched Arthur carefully. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept well, but his attitude toward her was the same mix of affection and anxiety as the past few days. "Arthur," she said finally, breaking the silence, "do you still visit Marianne's room?" He stopped eating, his fork suspended in mid-air. "Sometimes," he admitted after a moment. "Why?" Arthur put his fork down on the plate and faced her. "Because sometimes I still have nightmares about that night. I wake up thinking I could have done something different, that I could have stopped her from leaving. But you said it was for the best." "Rationally, I know it was. Emotionally—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It's hard to accept that you failed completely in protecting someone you loved." Claire felt a pang of jealousy, but tried to keep her voice neutral. "And do you still love her?" "I love her memory, yes, but I'm not in love with her, if that's what you're asking." Arthur stood up and walked over to where Claire was sitting, kneeling beside her chair. "Claire, you have to understand that it's possible to love someone in the past and be in love with someone else in the present. Is it? Have you never loved someone before me?" Claire thought of John, the boy from her hometown she had fallen for when she was 17, a sweet and painful memory at the same time. "Yes," she said softly. "And does that love diminish what you feel for me?" "No, it's completely different." "Then you understand." Arthur took her hands. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with Marianne. It's new, it's unique, it's ours." Claire wanted to believe him, but there was still something that bothered her. "Arthur, if she decided to come back one day, what would happen to us?" The question caught him off guard. "She's not coming back." "But what if she did?" Arthur was silent for a long moment. "Marianne made her choice 5 years ago. She chose to leave, chose to live away. From me. Even if she changed her mind, it wouldn't change the fact that our marriage died that night. And legally. Legally, I'm still married to her, yes, but that can be changed if it needs to be." Claire stood up, moving away from him. If it needs to be. Arthur, are you asking me to build a life with you knowing you still have a living wife in another country? I'm asking you to trust in what we have and not let it be destroyed by the complications of what's past. But those complications affect our future. How can I make serious plans with a man who is still married to someone else? Arthur stood up too, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Claire, I can resolve the legal issue. I can file for divorce. You should have done that years ago if you really wanted to move on. I should have, he admitted, but I had no reason to until now. There was no one worth fighting for. The declaration should have been romantic, but it only intensified Claire's confusion. And what if my decision to love you was based on a lie? What if I fell in love with a version of you that isn't entirely real? What version would that be? The version of the free, available man who was genuinely ready to start over. Claire walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where she had found a temporary peace. How can I know if you're really ready to love me, or if you're just running from the responsibility of dealing definitively with your past? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Arthur came up behind her but didn't touch her. Claire, I understand your doubts. I understand that I've made mistakes, that I've been a coward in some of my decisions. But if you give me a chance, I can prove that what I feel for you is real, and that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to build a future together. Claire turned to face him, and he could see tears shining in her eyes. I want to believe you, Arthur, but I can't build my happiness on such an unstable foundation. I need to know that if I choose to stay with you, it's because you've truly chosen to be with me, and not because I'm the most convenient option. What are you saying? I'm saying I need time away from here, away from you, to understand what I really want. Claire took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. Arthur's expression shattered. Claire, no. It's the only way I can be sure if what I feel for you is true love or just gratitude for offering me a refuge when I needed one. And if I fix everything? If I contact Marianne and make the divorce official? If you do that because you want a clean future with me, that's wonderful. But if you do it just to convince me to stay, then it will be for nothing. Claire touched his face gently. Arthur, you need to resolve your past for yourself, not for me. And I need to find out who I am when I'm not being protected by someone. That night they dined in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. After the meal, Arthur accompanied her to the library, where they had shared so many happy moments. May I ask one last thing? He said. What? Dance with me. There was no music playing, only the sound of the wind in the trees outside. But Claire accepted the hand he offered, allowing him to pull her close. They danced slowly in the middle of the silent library, holding each other as if for the last time, which, in fact, it was. I love you, Arthur whispered in her ear. I love you too, she replied, and they both knew it was true. But sometimes love isn't enough to overcome all obstacles. Sometimes it needs to be tested, refined, proven before it can fully blossom. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes. If you decide it's worth coming back, Arthur said, I'll be here waiting, no matter how long it takes. Claire nodded, not trusting her own voice to reply. On that last night at Vance Manor, she packed her bags slowly, putting away not just her clothes, but also the memories of the months that had changed her life forever. When she finally lay down, she knew she was doing the right thing, even if it was the most painful. Sometimes, leaving is the only way to find out if what we've left behind is worth the sacrifice of returning. Claire left Vance Manor on a September morning, when the fog still covered the hills, and the sun was trying to break through the low clouds. Arthur was waiting for her at the entrance, dressed in a heavy coat over his pajamas, his hair disheveled and his eyes red from a sleepless night. They embraced in silence for a long moment, both memorizing the feeling, the scent, the warmth of the other's body. When they finally separated, neither could say the words of farewell they had mentally rehearsed during the night. Take care of yourself, Claire whispered, touching his face. One last time. You too, Arthur replied, watching her get into the taxi that would take her to the bus station. As the car descended the hill, Claire looked back once and saw Arthur still standing at the gate, a solitary figure against the grandeur of the manor. Part of her wanted to ask the driver to stop, to run back into his arms and forget all the doubts that tormented her. But she knew it would only be postponing the inevitable. Some problems cannot be solved with love. They must be faced with courage. Claire returned to the countryside, to a small town called Clearwater, where no one knew her and where she could truly start from scratch. With the money she had saved working at the manor, she rented a small but cozy house in the town centre and began looking for work. The transition was harder than she had imagined. After months of living in the silent luxury of Vance Manor, the reality of ordinary life seemed harsh and noisy. But Claire forced herself to adapt, taking a job at a local library and starting to build a completely new routine. The first few weeks were the worst. She woke up every morning with a sense of loss in her chest, as if she had forgotten something important. At night, she dreamed of long, silent corridors, of the sound of a piano echoing through empty rooms, of trembling hands holding cups of tea in a moonlit kitchen. But gradually, Claire began to discover who she was when she wasn't defined by the work she did or the people she loved. She enrolled in an evening business course, started giving piano lessons to children on weekends, and slowly built a network of relationships in the small town. It was during one of these piano lessons, 3 months after leaving the Cotswolds, that Claire met Lucy, a 50-year-old widow who had decided to fulfill her dream of playing the piano after raising her children. Lucy had an infectious energy and a natural curiosity about life that reminded Claire how good it felt to genuinely connect with other people. "You seem like someone who has suffered a lot, but learned something from it," Lucy said in one of their first lessons as she struggled with a difficult scale. "Why do you say that?" Claire asked. "Because you teach with patience, but without pity, and because your eyes have that good kind of sadness, you know, the sadness of someone who has survived something important." The observation caught Claire off guard, but it also made her realize that she was beginning to process her own story in a more mature way. The time away from Arthur was giving her the perspective she needed to understand not only what had happened between them, but also what she wanted for her future. Meanwhile, in the Cotswolds, Arthur was going through the worst and best months of his adult life. The first days after Claire's departure were devastating. He wandered the manor like a ghost, unable to concentrate on work, unable to eat properly, unable to sleep for more than a few hours at a time. Mrs. Amelia did what she could to care for him, but even she admitted she had never seen her employer so dejected. It was on a particularly difficult night, when Arthur found himself once again in Marianne's room talking to ghosts, that he finally understood what Claire had tried to tell him. He wasn't honoring Marianne's memory with those nightly visits. He was clinging to a guilt that was preventing him from living fully. The next morning he made the first of several decisions that would change his life. Arthur boarded a flight to Lisbon the following Monday. He hadn't told Marianne he was coming. He didn't even know if she would want to see him. But he needed to look her in the eye and have a conversation that should have happened 5 years ago. He found her in a small cafe in the Alfama district, where she had agreed to meet after he insisted over the phone that it was important. Marianne was different, thinner with shorter hair, wearing simple clothes that contrasted with the dramatic elegance he remembered. But what struck him most were her eyes, clear, lucid, at peace. "You're well," he said, more as a statement than a question. "I am well," Marianne agreed, stirring sugar into her coffee. "I live a simple life here. I teach music at a local school. I have a few friends, a small apartment. It's a good life." "And the medication, the treatment?" "I see a local therapist and take medication for my bipolar disorder when needed. But mostly, Arthur, I'm well because I'm free." She looked at him, directly. Free from the pressure of being the perfect wife of a powerful man, free from the obligation to play a role that never quite fit me. They talked for hours in that cafe, revisiting the happy years and the difficult years, trying to understand where it had all started to go wrong. Marianne admitted that her illness had worsened significantly in the last few months before she fled, but she also said that she had felt suffocated by the way Arthur tried to control and protect her. "You loved me as if I were made of glass," she said. But I needed to be loved as if I were made of iron. And now, Arthur asked, are you happy? Yes, for the first time in many years, I'm genuinely happy. Marianne smiled, and he could see a lightness in her that hadn't existed for a long time. And you? Are you here because you've finally fallen in love with someone? The question took him by surprise. How did you know? Because you seem different, less tense, but also more vulnerable. And because I know you would never have come looking for me unless there was a very strong reason. Arthur told her about Claire, about how she had quietly entered his life and changed everything without him realizing it. He told her about the lies he had told, about the fears that had prevented him from being completely honest, and about how she had left because he couldn't properly resolve his past. She did the right thing, Marianne said when he finished. You need to close this chapter of your life before you can open a new one. That's what I'm trying to do. Then let's make things easy. Marianne opened her purse and took out an envelope. I brought these papers in case you came looking for me. They're the divorce documents already signed on my part. All they need is your signature and a lawyer to make it official. Arthur took the envelope with trembling hands, not from the Parkinsons, but from emotion. Why did you do this? Because I deserve a new life as much as you do, and because... Marianne hesitated for a moment. Because I've met someone too. She told him about Michael, a Portuguese history professor who had first become her friend, then something more. It wasn't a dramatic passion like the one she had lived with Arthur, but it was a mature love built on friendship and mutual respect. Are you going to marry him? Perhaps, if you sign these papers. Marianne smiled. Or maybe we'll just live together and be happy without complicating things with legal matters. I'm still learning that not everything needs to be dramatized. They said goodbye that afternoon, like two people who had loved each other intensely, had hurt each other mutually, but who could finally wish each other happiness with genuine sincerity. Arthur signed the papers at an international lawyer's office the next day and returned to England with a sense of lightness he hadn't felt in years, but resolving the legal issue was only the first step. In the months that followed, Arthur dedicated himself to an even more difficult task, resolving his emotional issues. He started therapy with a psychologist specializing in grief and trauma, finally processing properly not only the loss of Marianne, but also the fears and insecurities that had defined much of his adult life. He also began a more aggressive treatment for his Parkinson's, determined to maintain control over his health for as long as possible. More importantly, Arthur began to transform the manor. Marianne's room was finally opened, her belongings properly organized and stored, and the space converted into a music library where Claire could play the piano if she ever returned. He renovated the gardens, hired a team to bring life back to the areas that had been abandoned, and began to receive friends and colleagues at home for the first time in 5 years. The most significant transformation, however, was internal. Arthur learned to live with his own company without needing the ghosts of the past to fill him. He discovered hobbies he had abandoned, rekindled friendships he had neglected, and gradually built a life that would be fulfilling even if Claire never came back. But every night before going to sleep, he wrote a letter to her. He never sent them, but writing them helped him keep alive the hope that one day he could share with her the man he was trying so hard to become. The reunion happened in a completely unexpected way, one March afternoon the following year. Claire was at the Clearwater Public Library, organizing new books that had arrived, when Lucy appeared with a newspaper in her hands and an excited expression on her face. "Claire, you have to see this," she said, opening the paper to the business section. It was an article about the creation of a charitable foundation offering scholarships and vocational training programs for vulnerable women. The foundation had been established by Arthur Vance, a businessman from the Cotswolds, and was named the Claire Institute, though the article didn't explain the origin of the name. Claire read the article 3 times, her heart beating faster each time. The foundation was exactly the kind of work she had always dreamed of doing, helping women rebuild their lives, offering opportunities to those who needed a second chance. "It's your ex-boyfriend, isn't it?" asked Lucy, who had become Claire's confidant over the months. "He wasn't exactly my boyfriend," Claire said, but her hands trembled as she held the newspaper. Well, whatever he was, he's clearly still thinking of you. No one names a foundation after someone by chance. Claire spent the rest of the day torn between the joy of seeing that Arthur was doing something so meaningful and the uncertainty of what it meant for her. Was he trying to send her a message, or was he just honoring something that had been important in his life? The answer arrived 3 days later, in a box delivered by mail. Inside was an old vinyl record, the same song that had played on the radio the first night they kissed, and a handwritten letter. Claire, if you're reading this, it means someone was kind enough to tell you about the foundation. I hope you don't find it presumptuous of me to have used your name, but I couldn't think of a better way to honor the woman who taught me what it truly means to love someone. Over the past 8 months, I've done everything you said I needed to do. I sought out Marianne, and we talked like 2 adults about our past. We signed the divorce papers and wished each other happiness. She's well, Claire. She's genuinely happy in her new life, and I've finally been able to make peace with what happened between us. I also started therapy to properly deal with my guilt and my fears. I learned that loving someone doesn't mean trying to control them or protect them from everything. I learned that sometimes the greatest demonstration of love is giving the person the freedom to choose, even when that choice might hurt us. The manor is different now. It's alive again. I host friends, give dinners, even organize events for the foundation. But every night when the house falls silent, I remember the months you were here and how good it was to wake up knowing there was someone special sharing my space. I'm not writing to ask you to come back. I know you needed to leave to discover your own strength, and I hope you found everything you were looking for. I'm writing so you know that if you ever decide it's worth trying, again you will find a different man, not perfect but honest, not without a past but free from it. The foundation is doing well, but it needs someone to direct the vocational training programs, someone who understands what it means to start over, who knows how to help other women discover their own strength. I know the perfect person for the job, but only if she wants to accept it. If you don't, I will completely understand. Your happiness is more important to me than my own longing. Whatever your decision, know that you changed my life irrevocably and that I will be eternally grateful for the months you taught me how to live again. With true love and deep respect, Arthur P.S. The salary is excellent, and it comes with a beautiful house in the hills, if you're interested. Claire laughed through her tears as she read the postscript. Even when being vulnerable, Arthur couldn't resist a small dose of humor. She read the letter 5 more times before making her decision. The next morning, Claire resigned from the library, said goodbye to Lucy and the friends she had made, and took the first bus to the Cotswolds. She didn't tell him she was coming. She wanted to see his genuine reaction when she showed up. The manor really was different. The gardens were lush and well-tended. There were cars in the driveway besides Arthur's, and the windows that had always remained closed were now open, letting the sunlight stream in freely. Mrs. Amelia answered the door, and her face lit up when she saw Claire. "My goodness, dear, he's in the study, in a meeting, but—" The housekeeper shouted towards the interior of the house. "Mr. Vance, come here, quickly!" Claire heard voices coming from the study, quick footsteps, and then Arthur appeared in the hallway, stopping abruptly when he saw her. He was thinner, but he looked healthier. His hair was cut, he wore a light blue shirt that brought out his eyes, and there was an energy about him that hadn't been there before. But what struck Claire the most was the way he smiled when he saw her, not the controlled smile she remembered, but something completely open and genuine. "You came back," he said, as if he couldn't believe it. "I came to accept the job offer," Claire said, trying to maintain a professional tone, but failing completely. "The salary seems good, and the living arrangements are interesting." Arthur approached slowly, as if afraid she would disappear if he moved too quickly. "And the boss? I hear he has some issues." "I hear he's improved quite a bit in recent months." Claire took a step toward him. "And that he's learned some important things about himself." "And you? Did you learn what you needed to learn?" "I learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I learned that I can live alone and be happy. And I learned—" Claire took a deep breath. "I learned that I don't want to live alone if I have the option of living with the right person. And am I the right person? You're the only person for me, Arthur. You always were. I just needed to be sure I was choosing out of love, not need. They kissed then, there in the entrance hall of the manor, with Mrs. Amelia smiling through her tears in the background and the sound of voices from the study reminding them that there was life and movement in the house again. When they parted, Arthur held her face in his hands. "Welcome home," he said. "Welcome to your new life," Claire replied. 2 years later, they were married in a simple ceremony in the manor's garden, surrounded by friends, foundation staff, and some of the women who had been helped by the programs Claire directed. Mrs. Amelia was Claire's maid of honor, and Marianne sent a beautiful bouquet from Lisbon, along with a letter wishing the couple happiness. Arthur's illness progressed slowly, as had been predicted, but he faced each new challenge with the serenity of a man who had learned that life is worth living, regardless of its imperfections. Claire became not only his wife but his partner in every sense, in business, in the foundation, and in building a life that was infinitely richer than anything either of them had ever imagined possible. On quiet nights, when the manor finally rested after days full of activity, they would sit in the conservatory listening to Claire play the piano. The music echoed through the house that had once been haunted by silence, filling every corner with the promise that some happy endings are worth all the pain it took to reach them. And when Arthur held Claire's hand, feeling her fingers intertwined with his, even when the tremor made the movement difficult, he knew he had learned the most important lesson of his life, that truly loving someone doesn't mean possessing or controlling, but choosing them every day and being lucky enough to be chosen back. Vance Manor was no longer a prison of the past. It had become a home where the present was celebrated and the future, however uncertain, was faced with courage and true love. And every morning, when Claire woke up and saw Arthur sleeping beside her, she knew she had made the right decision, not just in coming back, but in leaving first, because only by leaving had she discovered that what she felt for him was strong enough to bring her back. Some love stories need to be tested by time and distance before they can fully bloom. Theirs had passed the test, and now they had a lifetime to reap the rewards of that hard-won victory. In the end, Claire understood that true love isn't about finding someone you can live with. It's about finding someone you can't imagine a full life without. And in the manor in the Cotswold Hills, shrouded in the morning mist and warmed by the sunlight that could finally enter through every window, two people had found exactly that.